The topic that I wanted to cover is managing in a hybrid world. And as you may know, we've done a number of polls on the Friday show, looking at aspects of managing in a hybrid world. So sentiment has generally shifted, and it kind of coincided, I think, roughly with when the vaccine was announced as being valid. The red one, if you can't really read it, but the red one basically is contraction and the blue one is expansion. And it's pretty obvious that it starts off with Boris Bounce territory, if you remember that expression, February of the previous year, when everything was really rosy and everybody was expecting fantastic. And then suddenly we had that scissor effect. And for about 6 months or so, it was up and down and nobody quite knew where we were at. And then vaccine comes along. And since then, the contraction dipped a couple of months ago to 0% of those being polled. And it's picked back to probably about 5-10% now. So generally, the mood is one of significant expansion. Now, that actually doesn't completely align with where the perception is that clients are at. And if you look at this one, and really just focus on the one on the right, the tall blue one, about 50%, is firms were kind of, all engaged, aligned with COVID success, on track for COVID success is what the actual slide says. And that's about half the professional firms, but only about a quarter of their most important clients, not all clients. So there's clearly a disconnect going on, a discrepancy between where the firms are at and where their clients are at. And we'll pick up some of the consequences of that later. Just to remind ourselves, we're talking here about management. So what are the sort of, if you like, the dominant management styles? And the one that comes through very strongly is one on the right, which is called inspire and enable. And the colors are, the olive one is pre-pandemic, the red is during lockdown, and the blue is what people expect in the hybrid world. So the general view there is that this dominant management style will become even more important and dominant looking into the future. Now, that could be at a strategic level for the firm. It could be at a you personally managing your team level. It doesn't really matter. That's the dominant style. The next one along is challenge and support. And then it's a smidgen which you've got command and control, or contract and review. And I know contract and review is slightly more common in the tech world where you're outsourcing, but generally those management styles are not seen as particularly relevant, I think, to the current climate. So if you're not practicing inspiring and enabling your people, then you may find yourself in a less optimal place. So where are people spending their time? Well, again, the same sort of colors come through. So what we're talking about here is a very strong shift, which is the blue line, where people have spent materially more time in lockdown on to the far right, managing down. Now, managing down is all about your people and your organization and keeping the show on the road. And at the far left, externally facing aspects. We'll pick up some of the consequences of that. The ones in the middle, reading from the right, managing across, desk-based work, managing up, and learning and development. So you've got a sort of a mix of areas. So L&D and focusing externally are the ones that people have spent less time on, whereas the managing down and managing across, in other words, working with peers and then making sure your team is focused on the task, have been where management have spent more time over during lockdown. And that was from the 16th of April. So it's fairly current poll, that particular one. What are the things that are seen as most important to the success of the business looking into during this lockdown period? And the ones that come across very strongly are communicating for, how much does deal with this, Jax? The ones that come through very strongly are basically communicating effectively, understanding and motivating others, and getting the best from your team. And so the people-based dimension is quite strong there. And the next one is making change happen. So I think the people who are focused on the people side have been the ones that have been more, so this is what has helped our firm achieve its objectives. On the far left, personal time management, solving problems, building personal resilience, dealing with difficult situations. None of those are really seen as that important. That's the sort of during COVID, but the ones that particularly strong is communicating effectively. That's like 85%, and the next one's in the 40s. So the real focus has been on communication, and So that's the strong message there. Let's have a look at the personal side, because at the end of the day, there's a management piece and there's a personal piece. And which are the areas that people felt they had been less effective? What were their areas of weakness? And the one that comes through massively is creativity. That's on the far left, where something like 8%, get it right, 8% of people felt that they were more effective and 60% said they were less effective. So whilst people have seen communicate, they haven't been fostering creativity. So maybe it's been broadcast, rather than communicate. I mean, they're not quite the same thing, as you appreciate. I'm broadcasting to you to some extent, but hopefully engaging in a conversation later. It's not quite the same thing. So other areas, people felt they were better at understanding, motivating others. Fine. I'll do that when I believe it. Getting the best from their team and building personal resilience. Those are the things they felt that did better. They were materially better at during lockdown. But as I say, on the other side, personal time management, dealing with difficult situations. And we'll pick some of those other ones up a little bit later, because as we all know, having a difficult conversation with somebody over Zoom isn't exactly the best environment to do it. So kind of what's that said to me was that actually, and I think this is probably the key takeaway for me from those slides, is that to date, is that strategy has lost ground to operations. And we actually tested that last week on Friday. And we asked a very simple question: how would you describe the balance between strategy and operations at your firm during lockdown? And 80% said there was 33% said there was significantly more emphasis on operations than on strategy. 47 said more emphasis. 20% were even Stevens, neutral, 0 in terms of the bottom half. So no firm being polled was putting more emphasis into strategy than operations. And you think about it, what are some of the key elements of strategy? Well, there's got to be a certain amount of creativity. There's certainly got to be external focus, and analysis didn't really figure in the things that people felt were important. So some of the 3 key elements of strategy were just missing. Well, therefore, it's not that surprising. Now, it's given that we're now in an uncertain world, and actually strategy and where you want to be in 3-5 years, it's absolutely critical for success. I think there's an element of myopia going on there. So that's my view anyway. So where are people spending their time if they're not thinking about strategy? Well, guess what? Finance, cash flow. I don't think they need to. The banks tell me professional firms are flush with cash. But anyway, that blue line, finance and cash flow, has been the one that pretty much across from about August every month has been the same. That's the one. And the other ones come through is clients, the purple one, which is about marketing and new business generation. People are in there. Client service is in there, operational performance is in there. You're asking where's tech? It is in there, but it's about 8th. The slide's busy enough as it is. So I'm afraid innovation, tech just are not being discussed at partner director discussions. And as we all know in life, if something isn't being discussed, then it's unlikely to get the appropriate focus and therefore less likely to happen. So that's where people have been spending their time. Is this all rosy? First slide you may remember was, it's all expansion. Well, couple of things that just need to bear in mind. The one that's probably most important is the blue one at the top, financial health of the client base. And what you're seeing there is that the client health, and in other words, are we going to do the job? Are we going to get paid? It's kind of, an existential question, if you think about it. That wasn't even around a year ago. Nobody worried about the financial health of the clients, so fine. But that suddenly becomes, at the moment, for the last 2 months has been the top item in terms of things that are going to prevent firms from achieving optimal performance. And the one that's kind of went up to the top, the purple one, that's the poor economic climate. That's kind of dipped away, because I think most people now see lockdown kind of easing, maybe 21st of June, maybe not. But generally things are changing and the economy is picking up quite fast. So I think that one's falling away. And then, of course, the red one, which was the whole area of skills and talent and lack of thereof, particularly, I'm sure, true in a tech space, is all of a sudden, from having dropped down to next to nothing towards the sort of middle end of last year, is suddenly up there in the pack, the red one. So the other ones would be the fee pressures and the whole area of margin erosion. But the ones that are really, I think, are watching are the financial health of the clients, because if your clients aren't in a good place, then you can't expand. I mean, it's just fairly straightforward, without a lot of dog eats dog. So let's move more now to the people side, because at the end of the day, we are people businesses. So what are the people issues here? Well, there's a consensus that people have been more productive during lockdown. And to be honest, we've done this one twice. We did it in July of last year, which is kind of when people were just coming out of the first lockdown, if you recall. And at that stage, there was a consensus, which is the red bar, that people were more productive, that impact productivity had increased. And we took the temperature again on the 9th of April, and the blues have moved slightly to the right, which is all right increase. So basically the message there was that, first time round, we thought that people were more productive. A year later, we're now sure that that is the case. So where does that drive things? Well, it kind of drives a number of different elements. So let's look at personal development, first of all. What's going on there? Well, interestingly, the elements that were sort of important to the public for personal development pre-COVID, which is the red bar, and they were being exposed to a variety of experiences at the top, taking on challenging assignments second, and working collaboratively with others third. Those three haven't fundamentally shifted in terms of importance. The one that has changed, and that won't surprise you given the KIT group, is digital, which is the fourth one, which grew from 6% pre-COVID to 20% during COVID. So there's been a shift in terms of personal development, in terms of the things that were more effective. And in terms of less effective, training programs completely lost the plot. I mean, they were something like a third of people would include them in their less effective ways of personal development pre-lockdown, and that's grown to 73% during COVID. So there's very much a clear message that running training programs hasn't really been very helpful. Coach mentor in about the same place. Second, sorry about this, Richard, but that's the way it is. Observing how your boss and others operate, about the same place, not in terms of less effective. The one that is probably the more interesting is the fifth one, bottom one, receiving challenging feedback from boss. And that has gone from being 20% of people citing that as being less effective to 40%. So it goes back to my point around how do you actually communicate difficult messages across Zoom? And I don't think anyone really has any answers on that, to be honest. I mean, one idea some people are mentioning is why don't we, for example, have a moderator in the room? And I played that to Steve Ingham, Michael Page, about 7,000 people. Yeah, 7,000 moderators with each of my quarterly get-togethers for appraisals. I don't think so. But the point is made that there are situations in which having somebody else in the room does actually help. I'm talking the virtual room there, obviously. So what's the key message coming out of all that lot? Well, working practices are going to be about trusting people. There's a big power shift going on, massive at the moment. People have now, as somebody was saying, they've pulled the bandage off management's perception that the only way they could manage people was by watching them in the office. Well, that just hasn't proved to be the case. People have been more productive, to be honest. So 65%. And when I did this poll, which is the 9th of April, so it's a little bit out of date now, 30% hadn't decided. So we're talking 95% here, said they were looking for people to continue working from home within clear guidelines. 95% who had decided at that stage, if that makes sense. 20% said that we wanted to give people to actually choose the most effective working pattern on a given day. That's the one that PwC have written about, you may have picked up. And some people are going to be generous and say everybody can take Fridays off or Friday afternoons off. That's 5%. But the broad message is that, and a lot of HR people are now working through the consequences, because obviously the policies just concerned with flexible working are no longer valid for a lot of organizations now under this new one. EY came out with their stuff yesterday. KPMG came out, PwC, some of the big boys are coming out now with what they're thinking. And it's all about whether you call it hybrid working or agile working, it doesn't really matter. It's about that. And that matters because about 70% plus of offices are expected to reopen by July. This again is about a month old, this stat, so a little bit at that stage, about 15% hadn't decided. About a quarter already had their offices open. 37% were going to do it within the 3 months and a few beyond, but about 70% plus will be open, assuming the government sticks to its roadmap, which at the moment still seems likely. I mean, it kind of fluctuates up and down with the politics, I guess. And within that, general consensus that people will be working at home 2 to 3 days a week. And that's time expected to, using the jargon, co-locate with colleagues either in firm offices or at client sites once offices reopen. I don't know where the word co-locate comes from, but I understand what it means. But 42% hadn't decided, quite frankly, in July, I think in April. So I think people are still beginning to make their mind up, but I think there's a general consensus that this will be the norm. Once open up, what's going on? Well, open for business for employees, obviously. Open for business for client meetings, absolutely. But 53% still weren't sure about events. In other words, bringing in people for non-client meetings, clients, whatever, associations, etc. And certainly when we've been reaching out to people saying, how about hosting our events? There's all been, well, we're still thinking about that. So I think that one's still, people aren't quite clear what they're going to do, quite frankly. This one is still very important though, because apprehension levels, when we were polling back in June, July, August time, you were looking at about 80% of people being apprehensive about returning to the office, the general mood. I mean, that's a very, very significant number. I think August 0% were relaxed, which is the blue line. When we did this one, beginning of April, about a month ago, it had dropped, but 47% were apprehensive and 29% were relaxed, the difference being neutral. So there's still a majority of people who are apprehensive about going back to the office. And it may not be the office environment, it could be the travel, it could be a whole host of reasons, but that we are still in a situation where people are apprehensive. And just kind of finishing up now with the slide before to pick up some of the key points, there's another issue which I'm interested in how this plays out in the tech world, because if you think about outsourcing, which is quite common in the tech world, people will put work out to India. I'm sure Mark knows much more about this than most, because the rates are less, because that way you get more people working for you for less money. Now, will you do the same for somebody who is hired in, I don't know, what should we say? Let's choose Blackpool. Let's choose a particular example. What's the local rates of Blackpool? A tech person working from home, and tech people on the whole like working from home, working from Blackpool for a London firm. Will you pay them London rates? So the answer is a lot of this poll, which was a week or so ago, 8% weren't sure. 54% said they had no plans to make material adjustments, and 38% no plans now, but we're keeping the matter under review. So in other words, this is really the finance. We've got a meeting next week of the finance group to look into this in a bit more depth about, will, as you change your business model, are your costs going to shift or not? And if for most firms, your salaries, including obviously your partner, equity partner, notional salary is going to be 60 to 70% of your total revenues as a percentage. Everything else is trivial in comparison to that. So this is a whole issue. Now, from a tech point of view, certainly the feedback I've had is that most tech people quite like the idea of working from home for about 9 days, a fortnight, and maybe going to the office occasionally, but the rest are very happy to sit at home as long as you give them lots of pizza and tech and everything else that they need. But how does that then impact the London waiting allowance, which across the country is around about 28%. I mean, it's a big, I don't think it's as much in our sector. I think we're slightly more even between regions, but certainly if you look across the country, it's a 22% discount, which is equivalent to a nearly a 30% uplift. So it's a material number. So I think people are still just beginning to grapple with that, quite frankly. So let's just kind of think of a few discussion topics, which might be helpful and might not, but I'll then let Roseby run with those. So firstly, just to recall at the beginning, inspire and enable is the dominant management style. No question about that. That strategy has lost ground to operations during lockdown. That people have been more productive during lockdown. That hybrid working practices are essentially based on trusting people. That more people are still apprehensive than relaxed over returning to the office. And as a result, firms are, to be honest, undecided whether to enforce attendance on office days. That's very much up in the air. I think the message that I'm taking away is that people should be using the time in the office for, I've called it collaborative activities that foster creativity. If it's just doing the job, probably actually quicker to do it at home. You're less likely to be disturbed. Think about how you're going to be welcoming people back to the office. Invest in a concierge. I mean, that's what you used to do in the days of hoteling. You went and hired the best concierge from the local hotel and you instructed them to run the front desk for you and really welcome people, because it will feel strange. There'll be less people. The whole place will be rearranged. It won't feel the same office. A lot of people say, oh, I don't really like it anymore. It's not the place I used to remember. Very importantly, and I mean, I appreciate that technology doesn't always have as much of an impact on the clients as some other elements of the business, but you're going to have to think about new ways to both segment and work with your clients. The traditional models, just the traditional segmentation isn't going to work. And remember that events, and this may be one of these ones as well, will remain mostly virtual. I think that message is coming through really quite strongly. So